The world around us is full of false choices. That temptation to be us versus them, for or against, in or out. But what does it really look like for followers of Jesus to engage in the messiness of life, the gray issues of faith, to truly allow our lives to conform to the gospel? Join us as we try to figure it out. We are the Brine and Janelle podcast.
I never aspired to be a mob guy. That's not what I wanted to be. My dad was kind of like the John Gotti of his days. I guess what I can say is that I was fortunate. I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business. I was very aggressive on the street. I worked very hard, and I was able to succeed. You know, it's just the way I do things.
Joining us live for the very first time is the featured speaker at this year's Cleveland Leadership Prayer Breakfast and the Akron Luncheon, Michael Franzese. Michael, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Brian. Thank you.
So, Michael, you have to help out folks here in Ohio who did not grow up in New York City. Can you paint the picture for us of maybe late elementary, early middle school Michael Franzese? What was life like for you?
Well, I'm sure it was different than many others in that my dad was the underboss of the Colombo family, one of the 5 New York Mafia Cosa Nostra families. And he was a very high-profile figure, a major target of law enforcement. So I grew up in that atmosphere where my dad was constantly, targeted by law enforcement. So it was all around us. And it was certainly had an impact on the family, me in particular. I mean, I was in school, I played sports, and, heard a lot of stuff from kids in school, and, it was just different.
How did you find out what your dad did for a living?
Well, there again, my dad was kind of like the John Gotti of his day. So he was always, in front of the media. They were writing about him all the time. So it was kind of hard not to know, what he was all about, even though, he would never bring it into the house. It's not something he discussed in the house. He didn't talk about, his lifestyle in any way. As far as Dad was concerned, we were a family. And, he owned a dry cleaning shop in Brooklyn, and, he was also involved in the music business. And that's what he, portrayed himself as. But like I said, it was very, very hard not to know what he was about with him constantly being in the media's eye.
How did it impact you emotionally as a young boy?
Well, I really loved my dad. I mean, he was my idol. He was a good father. He didn't want this life for me originally. He wanted me to go to school, be a doctor. He supported me, on the field. I was an athlete. So, I looked at law enforcement and the media that was targeting him as the enemy. I actually grew up hating the police and hating the government because I thought they were harassing my dad and my family. So, I grew up with that kind of mindset. So I guess, obviously that was wrong, but that's how I saw it back then.
So you mentioned your father did not want you to kind of take on the role of the family business. How did that end up happening?
Well, during the 60s, through that entire decade, my dad was, indicted 3 times in the state of New York for some very serious crimes. He went to trial for all 3 of those indictments and was eventually found not guilty. But then in 1966, he was indicted by the feds on a major case. He was accused of being mastermind of a nationwide bank robbery scheme. And he was convicted and sentenced to 50 years in prison. And it was, essentially a death sentence for him at that point. He was 50 when he went in 1970. So around that time, Joe Colombo, who was the boss of our family, he kind of took me under his wing. Obviously, I knew them well. I started to meet a lot of my dad's friends, and they said, Mike, what are you doing going to school? Because I was a pre-med student at Hofstra University at that point. I was 20 years old. But I said if I didn't help my dad out, he was going to die in prison. And, he always said to me that he was innocent, that he was no bank robber, and I believed him. And we had to work hard to try to overturn the conviction, or he would basically die in prison. So I started to move towards the street and ways to try to help my dad. And at some point in time in the visiting room in Leavenworth Penitentiary, my dad said, well, if you're going to be on the street and try to help me, then you need to do it the right way. And in his mind, the right way was to become a member of his life. So he proposed me for membership at that point.
How did you feel about that?
Well, I never aspired to be a mob guy. That's not what I wanted to be. But if I saw it as a way to help my dad, then I was willing to do it. And that's how I viewed it. It was all about helping my dad.
Did it help your dad, and was it overturned?
No, the conviction was never overturned. My dad, even though I did get him out on parole after 10 years, he kept going back. My dad was violated 5 times. So he was in and out over that 50-year period. He actually did 40 years on the 50. So did it help him? I guess it did, but he didn't stay out of trouble. So I don't know how you size it up at that point.
Yeah.
So over a period of time, you begin to find quite a bit of success. How did it become, at some point, more about you than your dad? Or didn't it?
Well, what happened is when I got part of that life, I wanted to be the best possible guy in that life that I could be. Not only to please my dad, because, it's just the way I do things. So when you're part of that life, you've got to be part of that life. It becomes about you and succeeding or failing. But in succeeding, making money was helpful because, to fight a case of that nature, it's very expensive between lawyers and investigators. And then, I became the major support in our family. I had 3 brothers and sisters. I had a mom. So, when my dad was doing 50 years, there was no income there. So I had to help out in that regard. I guess what I can say is that I was fortunate. I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business. I was very aggressive on the street. I worked very hard. And I was able to succeed.
It's Brine from the Brine and Janelle podcast. Want to hit pause real quick to ask for your help on something. Thank you so much for listening when there's so many other options out there. In fact, as you know, it can be oftentimes really hard this day and age to find quality Christian content in the podcast universe. That's why we'd be grateful if you'd consider spreading the word about the Brine and Janelle podcast. I mean, you know how it is. You find your favorite podcast, you listen to it, you're used to it, and you assume everyone knows about it. When the reality is, most of the great podcasts I've found out about over the years have come from direct recommendations from either podcast hosts or from other just friends of mine who tell me to listen to something. So maybe today you'd consider telling a friend about the Brine and Janelle podcast. We'd be super grateful. Let's get back to the show.
Me and my brother Frank, we take the money right out of the bank. Me and my brother Frank, we take the money right out of the bank.
So what does Hollywood get wrong about mob life?
Well, there's a lot of things. Look, there's been some great movies. We always point to The Godfather, which was obviously a tremendous movie. Mm-hmm. What was wrong about the movie is that it doesn't pass on from father to son that easily, to be a boss of a family. That was wrong. It doesn't happen that way. It can, but it doesn't. If you take individual films, Goodfellas was a pretty accurate portrayal of that life. Donnie Brasco was pretty accurate in that regard. A Bronx Tale, to a lesser degree, was a brilliant movie also. But then there are a lot that, they just, I don't know. Some of these movies, they make the mob look inept in many ways. And I'm not glorifying the life, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
of course.
yeah.
Listen, they to succeed over 100-year period under some very tough scrutiny is pretty remarkable for any organization to last that long. So, you don't sell it short, you don't put it down in that regard. But and some of the movies do that.
At some point, your life does take a shift, though, in a direction that I'm guessing not many others in your line of work had. So, as I understand it, you went to Florida for work, and something happened when you were there.
Yeah, among many things that I was doing, I had a film production company, and Smokey Robinson, who was a friend at that time, approached me with a breakdance movie that we filmed in Florida. And we brought cast and crew from L.A. to work in the film and about 20 professional dancers. And to make a very long story short, I, spotted one of the dancers on the film, and we started a relationship, and I fell in love with her. And we're now married for 37 years, and she was a young Christian girl, a girl of faith, and she had a tremendous impact on me. And it was really, she was my motivation for walking away from that life. I understood, that the life was in serious trouble. In the mid-'80s, when Rudy Giuliani started to very effectively use the racketeering laws, I knew that we were in trouble because I hadn't mentioned this, but, I had 7 indictments myself. I became a major target of law enforcement from day one because I had the name. And they scrutinized me, and I had a bullseye on my back for my whole time in that life. So I had 7 indictments, 2 federal racketeering cases. And I knew that, eventually I was going to go down. So I either had to, make a decision. I'm either in or out. And she motivated me to try to, create a life outside of that life.
Now, no offense, but why would a nice Christian girl go out with a mob boss? I mean, did you have great breakdancing skills or something at the time? Or what? I mean, how did you woo her?
Well, the funny thing is she was 20 years old. She was from Anaheim, California. She had no conception of Mafia or Cosa Nostra at all. She had seen The Godfather once and thought it was a good movie. That was it.
Yes.
So she really didn't, she didn't know much about me at all. She thought I was a film producer. And, I don't want to make it sound like I was dishonest with her, but I've never sat down even till today and talked to my wife about my former life. It's just not in me to do that. Now, obviously, she knows well about me now, but, back then I think it was too late. She fell in love with me and I and her. And, when she started to learn what I was about, her and her mom were devout Christians, and they just believed that, God was in control of the situation and would work out.
A lot of women put a lot of effort in terms of sharing the gospel with their spouses, whether it's before marriage or after. What was it about the way she shared it or what she shared that was most compelling to create such a change in your life?
Well, it was really her and her mom. Her mom was the most godly woman I've ever met in my life. There was, Jesus was like standing next to her all the time. There was no shame in her game at all about it. And, she was a prayer warrior. She had a prayer book that, she entered names into. She entered my name in there early on and prayed for me every day. It wasn't so much what they said. It was just the way they acted. Camille was 20 years old, but you could tell that she was different, in that regard. She was, her faith she was normal, don't get me wrong, but her faith was real to her, as it was with her mother. And that had an impact on me. Because, look, I grew up as a Catholic. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten right through high school. I was an altar boy the whole bit. But for me, it wasn't about a relationship with the Lord. For me, it was rules and regulations in Catholicism. And I'm not blaming Catholics, obviously. That's how it impacted me. But when I saw them live out their faith, it just had a real impact on me. I said, this is real. And what happened there, too, Jannelle, is I said, look, my life is a direct contradiction to everything these 2 women live for and believe. How is this going to work? I have to make a choice here. I'm either with them or I'm not. And that's what, she became more important to me than anything else, than my oath, my father, or anything else. That's when I decided to try to walk away.
Okay, so my knowledge of the mafia is like movies, like you just said. The thinking is it's like just like maybe like gangs where it's hard to get out. So what happened with that in terms of you leaving that lifestyle?
Yeah, I'm picturing a meeting where you're like, hey guys,
right.
I like Jesus a lot now, so I'm out, okay?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah. No, well, listen, you're right in your thoughts. There was no meeting because the meeting would have ended with me not walking out of that room.
For real.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, you don't walk away from the life. But I had a plan. Basically, the government, I had just beat a big case that Rudy Giuliani indicted me on. I was on trial for several months, and I was found not guilty. But then they indicted me, 3 months later on another big racketeering case. And here was the plan. I'll make it simple. I had leverage with the government because I beat them so many times. They really wanted a conviction on me. So I told my lawyer, look, I'm going to take a plea. I said, I'll do a couple of years in prison. I'll give them back some money that they say I allegedly, defrauded the government out of. I said, I'll marry Camille. I'll move out to the West Coast. When I get out of prison, I'll have parole, probation. You're not allowed to associate with anybody when you're on parole. I said, so, I'll stay out there. Maybe after 10, 12 years, they'll forget about me in New York. Now, it didn't work that way. But, a couple of things broke in my favor. Number one, like I said, I moved out to California. I never testified against anybody, any of my former associates. I never put anybody in prison. And so many guys had their own troubles. I mean, it was a devastating time for people in that life. I mean, they're going away left and right. They're being indicted left and right. So I became less important, to everyone. Now, I had some tough times, don't get me wrong, especially when I was out on parole and people were very upset with me, and there was a contract on my life, and my dad, in a way, turned on me. And, so there was a lot of stuff that I had to deal with. But, I think, again, God was in control, and I'm still here.
So I know there's the business life, but I'm sure you developed close relationships with guys in the mafia. Did you influence any of them throughout the years? Did any of them kind of come with you?
I've spoken to some. You got to understand this. Just about everybody I ran with is dead or in prison for the rest of their lives. Okay. They're all gone. But, some have contacted me, reached out to me. And, I think a lot of guys, if they knew how to do it, would walk away. But, that lifestyle has such an impact on you. It's very, very hard to change your mentality.
Yeah.
Without the Lord, I don't know that you can do that. I mean, it just has to be a transformation from within. For me, the mindset I had to break that mindset. And I think it only happens through a relationship with the Lord. I don't see it happening any other way because, look, I still have tendencies. I always say you could take the boy out of Brooklyn, but you don't take Brooklyn out of the boy. It doesn't disappear. You control it better. And, I tell people, look, I don't want to go back to prison. I say something at church that my wife cringes on. And I say, listen, I don't know if you know what I was noted for, but I had this big gasoline scam where we were defrauding the government out of tax on every gallon of gasoline. And it's eventually what I was indicted on. And it was a huge scheme, tremendous amount of money involved. But I say this in church. I say, listen, today, as I stand here on this stage, I have no moral issue with defrauding the government out of tax money. No moral issue whatsoever. But I won't do it because it's illegal, and I'm not going to jeopardize my family or my freedom or anything else. And, people in the church clap when I say that. Yeah. I'm being honest. I'm saying, look, morally, I feel I could do better with the money than they can. The government robs you of money, So people laugh, and my wife cringes when she's sitting there. She says, how could you say that? I said, well, I'm being honest. You got to be honest about things. That's my feeling. But, again, I won't do it because it's illegal, and I'm not going to put my family in jeopardy or my freedom in jeopardy. So, but, it's a whole mindset that has to change, and that transformation has to come from within, from the inside out.
Would you tell us more about how your dad reacted when you told him about your faith?
My dad reacted very unfavorably when he knew I was walking away from that life. He didn't like that at all. It wasn't so much him knocking my faith. I had an incident that I didn't know how my dad was perceiving all of this, but one of my goals in life was to make sure that he was saved and that he came to Christ. And it was very, very difficult for me to talk to him about the Lord. As a matter of fact, I still carry some guilt around because I don't think I did a good job with him in that. But there was a time I sent a chaplain in to see him. He was in prison. And when she walked in the door and she said, Mr. Franzese, I want to speak to you. I'm a chaplain. He turned to her and he said, wow, really? Well, that's great because my son is a priest. Now, he said it with joy. Now, I'm not a priest, obviously.
Yeah.
But it meant something to me because he said it to her with pride. He wasn't upset about it. So I knew he didn't, he didn't look down on it. And he believed in God. But and she told me that he accepted Christ during that 3-hour meeting that they had. Now, I didn't see a lot of evidence of that afterwards, but who am I to judge that? I just pray that happened. But so I think all in all, he accepted it well.
Now, before we say goodbye, I'd love to hear your advice for those who have someone in their life they think is just unreachable with the gospel. Because I think your story kind of runs counter to that. So what's your advice for the person who's praying for but just feels like someone's a lost cause?
Well, never stop praying. Listen, throughout my 25 years, on the road and speaking all over the world, I mean, I've seen transformations that, put mine even to shame, that they're amazing how God has reached out to people you never thought he would reach. So you never give up on that, and look, I always point to the thief on the cross. It could be a deathbed experience for someone, but if you put it in their brain and their heart and you pray for them long enough, we serve such a gracious, merciful God that in the last few moments of their life, they can accept him and they're forgiven and they'll move on to paradise. So never, ever, ever give up on anyone, no matter what you think, because, only God knows their hearts.
Once again, our guest has been Michael Franzese. He's the featured speaker at this year's Cleveland Leadership Prayer Breakfast. For more information, again, go to neoleadershipevents.com. Again, neoleadershipevents.com. We're going to be broadcasting live from the Cleveland event, the Renaissance Cleveland Hotel. Michael, I look forward to seeing you there. I'll be the guy that you'd go, that guy is never anywhere near the mob. Right. That'll be me.
Right.
Okay.
Like the least likely to have been in the mob. It will be me. Okay?
Well, that's good. That's good to know. I'll look for that.
Right.
Jannelle, you'll be there also?
I will be there. I can't wait to meet you in person. Your story's so inspiring.
I appreciate that, and I look forward to it. It's going to be a good breakfast. You take care.
You bet. God bless. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Me and my brother Frank, we take the money right out of the bank.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Don't forget, if you like what you hear on a weekly basis, we'd be grateful for your ratings and reviews wherever you listen. And also subscribe so you get the latest episodes. Follow us wherever you are on social media and search for us online. We're at brineandjanelle.org. Don't miss our weekday morning show with conversations just like this. You can listen on the Moody Radio mobile app or again at our website, brineandjanelle.org. Special thanks to the talented team of individuals who tirelessly put together this podcast every week. Josue Villa, Mike Reynolds, and Ron Eastwood. The Brine and Janelle podcast is a production of WCRF Moody Radio Cleveland. Until next time, we're Brine and Janelle.